Hi class, here I am to talk with you about the final paper for this course. I know, but look at it this way. Home stretch, actually. So I'm releasing these instructions verbally so you can get a sense of what this paper is. And hopefully today you have printed out the written instructions and the scenarios. So I want to spend a few minutes to just go over the paper, so answer verbally what you might ask about it, and just talk a little bit about what this paper is. So, again, this is a final paper that's comprehensive, so it's meant to cover the entire material from the quarter. But the good news about that is that this is not a research paper. It's not, so you don't have to do any external research for this. And as a matter of fact, you shouldn't, because what I want you to be able to do is use the material in the book, and any references you do should be from the book, but you don't necessarily need to reference anything in the book by page and number. But just know that this is the material you use for this final paper, not any outside research. And the point of that is that I want you to be able to demonstrate this material. So hopefully that's a little easier. And I have to congratulate you guys, because I have to say I'm impressed with the fact that a lot of you said that you hadn't had much experience at all in this population, or none. And I'm really impressed with how diligent you've been and how descriptive that you've been. And, really being able to apply these concepts and rehabilitation. So, like I said in the beginning, it's about severe mental illness, but obviously concepts like self-centered treatment and rehabilitation apply to all clientele. So hopefully, like your assignments, don't worry that you don't have a ton of experience with this population, because that's not really what this paper is about. So, and I think you'll do just fine in it. So let me talk about the paper and get the little pieces out of the way, so you have those questions answered. And then I'm going to spend a little time to do that, and then I'm going to make a second segment that talks a little bit more about what makes a good treatment plan for someone with a severe mental illness. So, as you'll see in the beginning, I talk about in the instructions that, all the key concepts that we've covered in this class, basically differentiating the nature of severe mental illness with other less debilitating conditions and disorders that you might have in your traineeships or in your practice. So part of what I'm going to be looking for is always making sure that you're talking about best practice and interventions for this population. I know I've said that a few times. So the purpose of this final assignment is to have you apply the material and best practice approaches for a specific client with severe mental illness, such as schizophrenia. So what you're going to do is, the first thing you're going to do is pick a client. I'm doing this a little different this year, so given what we're going through, had to change things up a bit. So I've given you 4 scenarios on here to choose from. No, you can't pick a client that you're working with. No, you can't find one on another source. I have some reasons for that, but I want you to pick one of these 4 scenarios. Partially, what I thought of is that many of you had some strong opinions and discussions and feelings about some of the clients that you did exercises on. So I thought, why not, for this paper, what you're going to do is take those same clients that you can look back on your assignments about and now do a treatment plan on them. So pick up where the exercise left off and then do a treatment plan. So hopefully that makes sense, because I see that you sometimes had some sort of energy behind some of those clients. So go ahead and pick the one that appeals to you the most. We have Eric, who's many of you were not so happy with the fact that his money was being tied to his medications, and that his treaters and mother were making all the decisions. So he's one choice to pick up for this final plan. One is Harry. I was so pleased that people saw that when you looked at what were Harry's strengths, found some real strengths with Harry, and particularly a strength of resiliency. So that's a client that's had a long history, has been in and out of treatment. So whereas some of you might have thought, what can you do after all these years, he's in and out, many of you really had some strong feeling like, hey, this guy's got some resiliency if he's just helped. So that's cool. So you might want to pick Harry. The other one is young Andrew. So young Andrew is from the video, and you already sort of got a start on assessing him and what are his symptoms and what are the symptoms that you'd be most worried about. And I sort of set you up on it by saying, well, what could go wrong? Many things could go wrong with young Andrew, despite as good as he looks on the surface. What could possibly happen that you'd need to do interventions on. So the other one I have on here, which you may or may not want to do, if you've ever seen the movie Benny and June. So I love this movie because it's a good depiction of someone who is a very kind of normal person with schizophrenia who has a good family and good, nice supports, all nice people, just trying to do their best, and it's just chock full of old actresses and actors, which is just great. So even if you don't do this one for this paper, sometime rent this movie because it's just a scream, all these old actresses. But it really is a nice depiction of a young girl with schizophrenia and her brother who's just trying to take care of her as best as he can. So it really comes to the family issue piece. So that's another choice. So you have 4 scenarios to choose from. What you're going to do is start out by saying, giving just a brief description of that, and it's as written in this paper. And then you're going to say who you are, what kind of care coordinator you are. So for the purposes of this paper, you are a care coordinator or a primary therapist or a primary counselor, whatever we want to call it, case manager. And you get to pick that kind. I'm going to caution you on one thing. When we talked about in that chapter, lots of folks wanted to look at that strengths model, and the strengths model is a wonderful thing. But in this paper, you're going to demonstrate interventions that are going to be outside of an office. So think twice about whether or not that kind of model could really support these clients. In the real world, most clients cannot be supported adequately by just in-office counseling. So you may choose another model. In some of these scenarios already, you're inherently in another model. So that's explained in here. Walk through that. What you're going to do then is come up with goals for your client. Start out with a set of goals. And once you have some goals, you're going to look at what would your interventions start out being for this client. Now, I purposely stretched this paper out to be over a year period of time. So you're going to go quarter by quarter and say, here's what my interventions are for the goals we came across, or that we came to together. Hopefully, as a client-centered therapist, you're coming up with goals with the client, not necessarily for the client. Then you're going to talk about what your interventions were and what's your rationale for why you chose those interventions. And that's very important to say specifically what they are and always what your rationale is. So you can't just list them. This is more of a narrative, not a written out list of treatment plan. So this is all about you explaining why you chose and how you made your decisions, that whole piece on rationale. That's what shows me that you really get it. That's what shows me your critical thinking and your insights. So you're going to do that for the first quarter, and then the second quarter you're going to review how it went and come up with new goals, maybe new interventions. Maybe you drop some, adds others, and then decide on how to go forward. So you're going to do that every quarter for a year, and at the end I have you do a little evaluation piece that just says, taking a look over the last year, what's your evaluation of that treatment plan? So you're essentially going to intervene in this client's life for a year. Now, the cool thing about that is that these are made-up clients. Even Andrew, after the camera turned off, is now a made-up client. So you can make up whatever scenarios you want to basically to demonstrate the interventions. And I'll talk a little bit about how to do that. But remember, you can, you also, I say in here, one tip is that it's fine to make mistakes with these clients in this paper, because by showing a mistake and adjusting your treatment plan, you've demonstrated to me that you thought it would be a good idea to go this way with a client, and something happens that you invent. Maybe the client has more symptoms, they go off their medications, you can have them get hospitalized, you can have them hook up, you know, with somebody with substance abuse that they never did before, so boom, all of a sudden you've got a new problem to deal with. So that's how this paper goes. You go down one road with interventions, and then the next quarter you say, well, you know, maybe I blew it because I expected this client to stay on their medications, and turns out they had no idea how to get their medications, or they had no idea which ones to take. I left them alone in an apartment because they wanted to be in housing, and turns out, you know, maybe I didn't tie money to Eric's taking medications because I thought that's not good, and he stopped taking them and he goes in the hospital. So you can have these clients do anything you want. They're not real people, and it's fine to sort of put them through the ringers and use your creativity. I mean, you can demonstrate pretty much every intervention in this book by having them go through different scenarios. So just know that actually makes a stronger paper to show, wow, I had to adjust my treatment because what I had hoped for wasn't appropriate intervention for this kind of client. And again, you're going to have to take off that, you know, in-office therapist hat and think like a care coordinator or rehab therapist, wherever you are, and think about the supports that they need. So that's what the paper is about, showing that you can make a plan, change it when you need to, and add a more successful intervention that's tailored to your client and tailored for this population. So, and I'm not going to say too much more about it because I want you to be able to, you know, read the instructions really carefully. One thing, you know, and because that's sometimes what people miss points on, is missing a section of this. So I don't want to do all that verbally. I really want to encourage you to carefully read the instructions, because sometimes people miss a whole piece, and that's a whole part of the paper. And since this is a, you know, kind of a comprehensive grade, it's worth 40 points. But as a final paper, it really shows me whether you got the material. The other piece is always that people lose points on, and I want to just cover for a second, is when you're talking about interventions, it's just so important to say the how of it. So if you can read this, it just says how. You have interventions, and you're going to describe why you used each of those for this client. You know, did you use some particular way to engage them, or did you use a certain different way to help them cope with the obstacles that they have? But the question is how. So in each intervention, be sure to talk about, you know, did you do that one-to-one? Did you do it in a group? There's pros and cons to doing things one-to-one and group. So just think through. There's not a right or wrong answer to a lot of this. It's just your rationale. In reality, I find these clients don't do so great in groups. Counselors like to do groups, but for these clients, they really have some trouble sitting in a group and doing open-end questions. So unless a group is run sort of like a class where everything's pretty structured, they tend to not do so well in them. But the caveat to that is sometimes dual diagnosis, that's a real appropriate place to have somebody in a group, but not always. When I ran dual diagnosis groups, I always saw the clients individually as well to make sure they were getting the stuff that we were covering in group, because they're just not getting it. But that's up to you to have a rationale for it. As long as you have a rationale for it and can convince me, you're good. Is it in office that you're talking to this client, if it's one-to-one, or is it in vivo? You know, the chapter on assertive community treatment talks a lot about doing things side by side with clients in their homes, in their apartments, in the community. Are you going to teach the client about social skills for dating in your office? Or are you going to take them out into the community, as we did in an ACT program, and talk about, gee, what is everyone wearing? How are people sitting? How are people behaving? Working on skills in the real world. I mean, they used to try and teach these clients how to cook in the office and expect that they'd go back into their kitchens and know how to cook. That's not going to work. You know, unless you're teaching, you can only teach real activities of daily living skills where the client is, in their own apartment, on their own stove, in their own wash machine. So that's for you to like sort through. There's some of these are really very much best practice. So for each intervention, you're going to want to go back to the book and say, well, what's best practice? It says it right there. So I'm encouraging you to just, even if you, I mean, if you might wish that you could say, you know, I want this client to just come to my office across town once a week and get insight. That might be fine for a different client, but for these clients, I need you to show me that you know the difference, that you're gonna help that client learn coping mechanisms, and if they don't show up for your appointment, this is what some people do. And the point is, in the paper, is you can say, wow, I had a great big plan, that was all great, I was going to have a whiteboard with CBT and teach a person like what in the film, like what it means when somebody stares at you on the bus. But the client never showed, which means you as the care coordinator didn't anticipate that obstacle. So then you say, oh, got to switch gears. I'm going to do the same thing, only at the client's house. Or I'm going to go pick them up for their appointment. So that's how this paper goes. And that's how best practice and interventions are really done. So enough about that. I'm going to stop now. And let you, just like I said, be sure to just like read these specifically and email me if you have any particular questions. Hopefully you'll find this sort of engaging, especially with the clients. Pick a client that you feel, engaged with, and that's great. So you've got 4 to choose from, and the more you can just send this client through a life for the next year, the more I see you get what their life might be like. So at the end of it, you look at it and you say, is that a pretty good depiction of what someone with this illness, schizophrenia, because that's what your client has, might go through, and what their life's more like. And hopefully you've provided client-centered, individualized treatment interventions, and can say, wow, I did a great job working with this client, because you will. I know you will. So that's that, and there'll be another segment on best practices.